All right, let's move to the AFC North, where we have the Ravens. And the Ravens, to me, are right now, they've suffered a lot of losses. I understand that. I don't want to minimize the losses they've suffered. I still think that we take playoff failure and assign it to regular season failure, and those are two very different conversations. The Ravens last year were one of the best teams of the regular season. I don't see any reason to think that they won't still be a very good team this year. So I like where Baltimore is, but Baltimore is in a, I think, unique situation where they have some needs for a team that's come across. Like, they could go D-line, they could go O-line, they could go wide receiver. I think they have needs that they need to address for a team that I am very high on.
Yeah, I agree. Tough off season for them, really. You lose Clowney, you lose Geno Stone, you lose Patrick Queen. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to replace. And for them, I'd love to see them get an elite pass rusher, a war daddy, as Jerry Jones called it. I love that term. I use it. War daddy, I think is amazing. They don't have that. They had this great sack total last year without a unbelievable pass rusher off the edge, which is really, really rare. A lot of that was Mike McDonald, their defensive coordinator, is really, really smart guy. Well, he's off at Seattle now. Can they get a pass rusher? It's going to be hard. Also, receiver. Maybe it's a fun factor for me to just see weapons around Lamar Jackson, but we know Odell Beckham really didn't work. Rashad Bateman it hasn't really developed as they liked. It would be nice to have somebody alongside Zay Flowers to develop along with Lamar in that passing game. But I think edge rusher, if you could give me one thing to replace it, give them somebody who can get 10 sacks and just beat somebody off the edge, because they really haven't had that the last couple of years, but still have done a pretty good job rushing the quarterback. It'd be fun to see them with one of those guys who could just dominate a game, like a TJ Watt, that type of player.
I love the concept of war daddy until you remind me that it's a Jerry Jones phrase, and now all I can think of is Jerry Jones saying anything that involves daddy, and I'm out. All right. Now that I've made everybody uncomfortable. The Bengals up next on our list, and this one, Frank, this is the easiest thing in the world. Replace T. Higgins. It's a deep wide receiver draft. You know you're going to lose T after this year, right? So go get yourself your next T. Higgins. In my mind, keep putting weapons around Joe Burrow. Make his life easier and easier. Maybe I'm just playing video game football, but I want the next T. Higgins there.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. But it's one of those, what do you do for this year versus the future, the next 5 years? I like them to draft something in the interior defensive line. DJ Reader moved along to the Lions. That was I wrote about my 5 favorite moves of the offseason. DJ Reader being signed by the Lions was one of my 5 favorite moves, which means it's a big loss for the Bengals, right? I know he's coming off injury. He's 30 now, but they were bad against the run with DJ Reader most of last season. They really need the interior defensive line to be better. And that's more of a win now thing, right? Like you draft a receiver, obviously that's going to pay dividends even this year if that receiver hits. But if I'm the Bengals, I'm saying, we do have T. Higgins for one more year. What do we need to do to get to a Super Bowl with this group? Because T's probably leaving after next season. And to me, it is the defensive line. It's not a sexy pick, but it's what they need. They need to be better against the run than they were last year.
I mean, why do you hate sexy, Frank? All I want is sexy out of this. Look, at some point, this is simple for me. I mean, T's leaving, so you give yourself the next T, somebody you can develop a little bit, because sometimes it takes wide receivers a year or two to learn. Plus, the other side of it is, in the meantime, you have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and one of the better wide receivers in this year's class. Come on. How do you stop that? They're going 3 wide everywhere. They don't even need an offensive line, which, they've tried. I'll give the Bengals credit. They've tried many times through the draft and free agency to address the O-line, and they're sure good at it.
It seems like every year, it's like they signed this guy, they drafted this guy, they signed this guy, and every year we're sitting here and April 1st or whatever it is saying, well, they could draft another offensive lineman because it's still a need. It's kind of crazy how they haven't really, really solidified that thing with all the resources they poured into it.
Yeah, we just, we disagree on this because I want beautiful things for Joe Burrow. Actually, maybe I want Joe Burrow to become so unhappy that he forces his way out of Cincinnati to Vegas. Never mind. Don't draft all defense. Never draft anything for Joe. That feels like I've now solved a perfect solution. All right, the Browns. Any thoughts on the Browns and where the Browns are a tough team in my mind to evaluate, because I genuinely believe the biggest problem Cleveland has right now is their quarterback, and I don't think there's anything they can do about the fact that they have a problem at quarterback. So it's an interesting situation to be in for Cleveland, that they have draft needs, but they won't be able to address any of those draft needs early in this draft. And by the time they get to address, because they don't have a first round pick, by the time they get to, it's almost like best player available is all they can. Their defense is great. They don't need anybody on the defensive side of the ball. They went out and got another wide receiver. They don't need help there. Like, they need a quarterback. What are you going to do there? No, there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and sometimes these exercises can be very illuminating, because I sat there, like I said, doing some research for the show. Because you don't think about this always in the team concept of what do they need ever to, and I really studied them, and I said, Browns really don't have any weaknesses. And I include quarterback. I have not given up on Deshaun Watson being a good quarterback. Look, it's hard to talk about Deshaun Watson in glowing terms as a quarterback because of all the off-field stuff, but let's just talk about him on the field. And I talked about this last week because BetMGM came out with their over-under totals, with season win totals for the season. The one that jumped out to me right away was the Browns at 8.5. Why would the Browns be 8.5? People are that low on Deshaun Watson, who 3-4 years ago was one of the elite quarterbacks in football. Let's not forget, Houston, Texas, Deshaun Watson was one of the best quarterbacks in football. He was one of the best quarterbacks in college football at Clemson. He's had a rough couple of years. I agree. There is skepticism, and rightfully so. But is Deshaun Watson that much of a liability that you say, well, they lost Joe Flacco off an 11-win team. Of course, they're going to be an 8-win team this year with Deshaun Watson. I don't think so. And doing this exercise of trying to figure out what are the Browns' needs, I said, the Browns don't need anything. Maybe a running back, because Nick Chubb is no sure thing. I hope Nick Chubb comes back and rushes for 1,500 yards, right? Very likable guy, great running back. But maybe a running back, something like that. That's a luxury pick for a team that has everything else. Yes, Deshaun Watson's a question, no doubt about that after the last couple of years, but I haven't given up on the thought of him being good still. And the Browns are absolutely loaded around him. I'll still say 8.5 at BetMGM right now for the Browns. If you dabble, I'll just say that line stands out to me a lot, because this Browns team is really, really good.
Here's what's interesting. I wanted to be cute, because they don't pick until 54th. Their first pick of the NFL draft is 54th. I wanted to be cute and live in a world where somehow, I don't think this will happen, Michael Penix Jr. falls. Like, he's not selected in the second round. The Browns take Penix and treat him like Jordan Love. The problem is there's still 3 years left on Deshaun's contract, right? That they can't get out of. And in the second round, you only get 4 years on a quarterback deal. So they would be in a terrible situation. So I really think the Browns are, you're right, their weaknesses aren't easily fixed in my mind. I don't share the Watson love with you. Like, I think that, the time off and everything else is just like, sometimes guys in baseball get the yips. It feels to me like Deshaun has a bit of the yips. I don't think anything fixes that. I think he's cooked, and he's going to be a liability for the Browns for the next several years. That being said, I don't think there's anything they can do about that. So if there's nothing they can do about it, they just have to go best player available at 54, whatever that might be. And I don't hate the thought of a running back there, because there isn't going to, the running backs aren't going to be run on early. This is not that type of class, but there are going to be running backs that are there for the taking. So that's an interesting, you know what? I'm going to go with the running back concept. Let's go to the Steelers next, the team well. I don't know. The Steelers are just sort of, they weren't going to be in a spot where they were going to get themselves a quarterback. We all knew that. That's part of why I think they were aggressive in doing what they did, right? So I got no problem with that. Their pick isn't until 20th. It just feels like the Steelers are going to be in a situation where they can get a good secondary option if they want. They can bring in somebody, right? Like, they don't have a ton of glaring needs to me, but like, I wouldn't have a hard time with them going like corner, maybe,
Yeah, go along with Joey Porter Jr., who was a great pick for them. He got him in the Chase Claypool trade, which is just magnificent work by the Steelers there. The Steelers are another one of those O-line teams. It seems like every year we talk about their O-line being a problem. They can always go O-line. I think receiver, Deontay Johnson has moved on. They traded him to Carolina. I think replacing him somehow. George Pickens has all the talent in the world, and he's still kind of unreliable. I don't know that I want to put all my eggs in George Pickens' basket, so another receiver to really receiver deep class. I can see them going that way.
I just don't trust the Steelers offensively to be able to utilize a receiver if they got one. I don't love the quarterback situation. Right, I don't love Arthur. Like, everybody keeps telling Arthur Smith's now the offensive coordinator. Go back and watch those Titans offenses. I know that got him a job as a head coach, but it didn't give him a job as a head coach because of their greatness with wide receivers. The Titans were really bad at identifying wide receiver talent for years. And Arthur Smith was part of that. So, like, I don't trust the Steelers and Arthur Smith to get the most out of a wide receiver or to even be able to identify the right one. I have very little trust in that.
You might be right. I think their defense is fine. I mean, you can always use talent on either side of the ball, but to me, the connecting pieces on offense need some work, except maybe like they're fine at running back, they're fine at tight end, but offensive line, receiver, either one of those, if I was a Steelers fan, I'd be happy with.